I can still hear the words as if they were etched into my skin, carved by the sharpness of my father's tongue. Don't come back until you're successful. The clinking of silverware had stopped. My brothers had smirked into their plates. My mother's face was frozen in that practiced look of disdain, and my father, stone-faced, unmoving, delivered the sentence like a judge handing down a punishment. That was the night I was erased from my own family. It was supposed to be an ordinary family dinner, though I should have known better. Nothing in that house ever stayed ordinary for long, not when I was in the room. The roast chicken sat at the center of the table, surrounded by bowls of potatoes and salad, but the food had already turned to ash in my mouth by the time the conversation began circling me. "So, Olivia," my mother said, her fork poised delicately, her eyes sharp as glass. "Still working that little job at the bookstore?" The words "little job" burned. She said it loud enough that my siblings could exchange glances, their lips twitching with amusement. "Yes, Mom," I answered, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "I like it there." "You like it because it's easy," my older brother Daniel muttered, not even bothering to look at me. "Meanwhile, some of us are building real careers." The others chuckled. My younger sister, Emma, shook her head in mock pity. "You're 24, still stocking shelves while the rest of us move forward. Don't you think it's embarrassing?" I swallowed hard, staring down at the grooves in my plate. I had nothing to defend myself with, no shiny degree to brandish, no promotion letter in my pocket. Only the truth, that life had felt heavier for me than for them, that I had stumbled where they had soared. But in this house, excuses were weakness, and weakness was blood in the water. I should introduce myself properly, though maybe you already know me, because perhaps you've been me. My name is Olivia Martin, and I was born into a family that prized achievement above all else. I am the middle child, too old to be coddled, too young to be admired, always standing in the shadow of my siblings. Daniel, the eldest, had been the golden boy since birth, athletic, brilliant, a scholarship kid who breezed into law school as if doors just opened at his touch. Emma, the youngest, was the darling, effortlessly charming, a rising star in her university's business program. And then there was me. The in-between. The almost. The one who never quite reached their level, no matter how hard I tried. As I sat at that table, their laughter still buzzing in my ears, I drifted back to all the moments that had led me there. I remembered being 10 years old, standing on the soccer field, clutching my participation ribbon with pride. Daniel had just returned from a tournament with a golden trophy nearly half his height. My father had lifted the trophy high in the air, his voice booming with pride. "This is what it means to be a Martin." I had tried to show him my ribbon, timidly tugging at his sleeve. He had glanced down only briefly before patting my head. "That's nice, Olivia," he said, "but one day you'll bring home something real." Something real. That phrase had haunted me for years. At 15, when Emma was crowned debate champion, I had been in the corner of the auditorium with my sketchbook, doodling quietly because no one had come to my art show. My mother's voice still rang in my head. "Art is a hobby, not a future." By the time I was 20, failure had become my reflection. Every attempt I made was weighed against my siblings' victories, and every stumble proved their case, that I was the weak link, the burden, the disappointment. Back at the dinner table, I tried to breathe through the suffocating silence after their laughter. I forced my lips into a smile, though I felt it crack under the weight of humiliation. "I'm figuring things out," I said. "Enough," my father cut me off, slamming his glass onto the table so hard the wine rippled. His eyes locked onto mine, gray and merciless. "You're 24 years old and you're still floating. You have nothing to show for yourself. No degree worth mentioning, no career, no ambition that I can see." I opened my mouth to speak, but his hand sliced the air. "Don't come back until you're successful." The room went silent, heavier than thunder. My mother's lips curled, satisfied. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking, while Emma whispered, "Finally." That was it. No warning, no discussion, no mercy, just exile, packaged neatly in one brutal command. I rose from the table slowly, my legs trembling. No one moved to stop me. My chair scraped across the hardwood, the sound shrill in the tense air. My heart screamed, but my throat closed tight. I wanted to beg them to see me, to recognize that I mattered too, but their faces told me it would be useless. I walked to my room in a daze, grabbed a small duffel bag and stuffed it with clothes. No one followed me. No one asked me to stay. By the time I walked to the front door, I was invisible. When the door closed behind me, the rain met me like cold applause. The night was black, the streetlights blurring through my tears. I stood on the porch with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the chills seeping into my bones. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly alone. I walked down the steps and into the storm. My family's house loomed behind me, glowing with warm light, laughter faintly echoing through the walls. But I was no longer part of that world. That night in the pouring rain, I realized I had no home anymore. The first place I slept after the rain was a bus station bench that hummed like a refrigerator. I set my duffel under my head, hugged my knees to my chest, and tried to ignore the draft that found every seam in my jacket. The fluorescent lights made everything look like a bad photograph. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed of our dining room, the roast chicken, the full glasses. My chair scraping back while my father's voice cut the air. I woke up to an announcement about the midnight bus to Ashford and the taste of metal in my mouth. I took that bus without knowing what waited on the other end. Ashford felt like the sort of town where people forgot you fast. I found a room on the edge of downtown in a house that had been subdivided so many times you could hear your neighbor breathe. The landlord met me on the porch and jingled a ring of keys like it was an instrument. The room smelled like old carpet cleaner and onions. There was a window that stuck when you tried to open it and a radiator that hissed like a stray cat. The walls were thin enough that I learned my neighbor's favorite lullaby by the end of the first week. He sang it to himself when the drinking wore off and the quiet hit too hard. I got a job at a diner that pulsed under a neon sign the color of stomach acid. 3 days in, I learned how to take orders while remembering home addresses for deliveries and counting change without looking at my hands. Grease worked its way into my clothes. By the time I got back to my room each night, I smelled like onions and burnt coffee. I kept my uniform folded on the chair for the morning and slept on the other side of the bed so the smell would not climb into my hair. Payday came with the confidence of a coin flip. After rent, there was just enough for bus fare and rice. I learned to make a pot stretch across days. I knew which shelves had the dented cans and which cashiers looked the other way if your total came up a little short. Hunger taught me a new calendar. Mornings were measured in coffee refills. Afternoons tasted like the salt you lick off your thumb when you get a pretzel sample and pretend you might buy the bag. I took a second job shelving books at a thrift shop. The owner paid cash and called everyone kid. He once told me I stacked biographies like a person who believed in witnesses. I did not know what that meant, but I liked the idea that I could place a life on a shelf and it would stay put. At the diner, a trucker slipped me a $5 bill and told me to keep the change, then whispered that a smile looked better on me than worry. At the thrift shop, a woman with silver hair bought a used copy of a cookbook with the spine cracked near the pie section. She told me there are 2 kinds of hunger. The first hollows you out. The second builds a room inside you where you can grow. I nodded like I understood. I went home and ate rice with butter and replayed her words until they sounded like instructions. My parents did not call. Weeks dripped into months. I checked my phone the way you check a bruise. Sometimes I tapped the screen and pretended to read a message that was not there, just to feel a shape in my hand. On Sundays, when the diner slowed and the thrift shop closed early, I sat in the laundromat and watched clothes tumble. It felt like the only time my life made circles instead of cliffs. One afternoon, a cousin texted me a picture of my family at a backyard party. The grill smoked like a steam engine. My father lifted a beer in a toast. My mother wore a dress the color of red apples. Daniel held a toddler who could only be my sister's godchild. Emma leaned against the fence with a smile that had teeth. My chair at the patio table sat empty, a ghost of a seat. The caption said, "Wish you were here," but I could hear the joke hiding under it. I closed the message and did not answer. The gossip found me anyway. A woman from our old church stopped in the diner for breakfast on her way through town. She squinted at my name tag and then at my face. "You are a Martin," she said. "How are your parents?" I told her they were well, because that was easier than explaining how a sentence could cut a person in half. She said she had heard I was taking time to find myself. She said it with that warm, pitying tone that dresses a wound in lace. I refilled her coffee and felt something inside me fold and fold until it could fit in my pocket. A week later, another cousin posted pictures from Thanksgiving. Long table. Candles like small soldiers. My mother's silver. Place cards written in her careful script. I zoomed in just to see if there was one with my name, and there was not. My father carved the turkey while Daniel told a story with his hands. Emma stood next to the pie like it came from her oven. No one looked like they had misplaced a daughter. I learned to keep my head down. I learned which customers were kind because they were built that way and which were kind because they wanted to watch you be grateful. I learned to fold my shame into a shape that could live under my tongue. When I cried, it was in the shower where the noise could drown itself. But exile can be a classroom if you let it. Every shift taught me a problem I could solve. I found a rhythm in the clatter of plates. I could read a table the way some people read weather. I could sense when the couple in the booth needed silence more than small talk. I could tell when my manager was going to explode and when she was going to apologize. The thrift shop gave me hands that knew how to mend. I stitched buttons back onto coats and watched the coat regain its purpose. I told myself I could do the same with a life. The landlord raised the rent that winter. I took a third job cleaning offices after hours. The buildings were empty except for the hum of lights and the click of my own footsteps. I wiped fingerprints off glass doors and thought about the people who left them there. I ran the vacuum across carpets that held the day's secrets and imagined conversations I could not hear. The offices smelled like lemon cleaner and ambition. There were framed diplomas on the walls and a photograph of a mountain in a hallway that made me stop and stare. Whoever hung it believed a person could climb anything with enough daylight. Sleep became a currency. I traded it for stability and told myself I could buy it back later. When I did sleep, it was the kind that drags you under without dreams. I kept a notebook in my bag and wrote down 2 things every day. What I learned, what I wanted. Sometimes the lists were small. Learned how to reset the coffee machine. Want black boots with warm lining. Sometimes they were too big for the page. Learned I can survive a day that looked like it would eat me. Want a life that does not apologize for itself. On my birthday, I worked all 3 jobs. At the diner, the cook stuck a candle in a pancake and yelled my age across the line. A regular sang to me off-key. I laughed and thanked him and then cried in the walk-in freezer where the air cut your breath into small squares. When I got home, there was a card slid under my door from my neighbor who sang lullabies. He had drawn a cake with crooked candles and written, "The world is still possible." I taped it to the wall next to the stuck window and felt a strange heat in my chest that did not come from anger. Spring arrived like a slow apology. The radiator shut up. The trees that lined my street put out leaves the color of fresh thoughts. I took long walks past houses with porches big enough to hold a whole season. I counted the steps between bus stops like they were beads. I started running in the early mornings when the town was soft and the sidewalks felt like a promise. My lungs burned in a way that felt honest. When I ran, I could hear my own footsteps and nothing else. My father's sentence grew quieter with each mile. The gossip shifted. A distant aunt told someone who told someone that I was stubborn. The word hung in the air like a nail. Stubborn meant I had not crawled back. Stubborn meant I was not available for their sympathy. Stubborn meant I chose my hunger over their table. I wore the word like armor. It was not soft. It was not flattering. It was strong enough to keep my spine straight. In the thrift shop, A woman I recognized from my old neighborhood brought in a box of clothes and set it on the counter with care. She looked at me the way people look at a place they once lived. She asked how I had been. I told her the truth. Working, eating what I can, sleeping when I can. She nodded and put her hand on the box. "You remind me of my sister," she said. She had a way of making a corner into a doorway. I did not know what to do with that sentence. I wrote it in my notebook anyway. I started reading in the hours between jobs, not just novels, manuals, business books that made big promises, biographies of people who got thrown out of rooms and built their own. I underlined sentences until the pages looked like maps. I traced the patterns. Nearly everyone who made something lived under a weight first. The weight did not break them. It sharpened them. It forced them to learn what mattered and what could be thrown from the cart. I stopped waiting for a call that would not come. I blocked the group chat that served family photos I was not in. I deleted the cousin with the captions that stung. I made a new habit of asking a question every day that scared me. Could I budget for a night class? Could I negotiate a higher rate for the cleaning contract? Could I tell my manager I wanted to learn scheduling so I could pick up more responsibility? Sometimes the answer was no. Sometimes the answer was not yet. Sometimes a door opened just enough for me to get my fingers in the gap. The first time I turned down a Saturday shift to take a free community workshop on bookkeeping, I felt like I had stolen from myself and given it back at the same time. The instructor showed us how to track income and expense streams like rivers and tributaries. He said numbers tell the story you are brave enough to ask for. I went home and laid my bills on the floor in rows. I made a budget that did not leave me gasping at the end of the month. It was thin as a tightrope, but it held. Late one night after cleaning offices, I stood in the lobby of a building where the glass doors reflected me back at myself. My uniform. My tired eyes. The mop handle leaning against my hip like a flagpole. I could hear the city settle into sleep outside. The photograph of the mountain hung down the hall, moonlight sticking to its peaks. I walked toward it and stood under it until my neck ached. I thought about the climb, the air thinning, the legs burning, the point where most people turn back. I remembered my father's voice, "Do not come back until you are successful." Something steady rose up inside me, not anger, not grief. Something that sounded like a verdict I could live with. I pressed my palm against the cool glass of the frame as if I could feel snow through it. My breath left a small circle of fog that faded and came back with each inhale. I spoke out loud in the empty hallway so I could hear the truth land. I will not crawl home. I will not beg for their table. I will build my own and feed the people who show up hungry. I will learn everything they said I could not learn. I will carry this weight until it turns me into iron. Success stopped being a word with their fingerprints on it. It became a map I would draw with my own hands. I picked up the mop. I finished the floor. I locked the door behind me and stepped into the night with a spine that felt like a new structure. The air was cold enough to bite and clean enough to forgive. On the walk back to my room, I did not think about the chair that waited for me at their table. I thought about the chair I would carve, sand, and place at mine. I thought about a key ring with more than one door. I thought about a window that opened on the first try. I did not know the shape of the mountain yet. I knew only that I was done standing at the base. I would succeed or die trying. When you build in the shadows, no one sees the foundation, only the moment you appear fully formed. But I remember every nail I drove into the dark. After that night in the office building, I changed the rhythm of my life. I didn't wait for opportunity to knock. I went hunting for it in alleyways, public libraries, and the back pages of job listings most people skipped. The diner still paid the rent, and the cleaning gig still paid the bills, but I needed something that would change the math, something that would build me. One night, scrolling through community announcements on a borrowed library laptop, I found a flyer for a 6-week bookkeeping course, free for night workers. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7:30 p.m. to 900. I stared at it so long, the screen dimmed. Then I walked to the front desk, signed my name on the clipboard, and walked out knowing I'd have to race across town twice a week after my shift ended just to make it on time. That first class was in the back of a community center that smelled like old sports mats and lemon disinfectant. There were 8 of us, all from places like mine, people with aching feet, short tempers, and long debts. The instructor was a tall woman with braids down her back and glasses that magnified her eyes until you could see the kindness in them. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she ran the room like a drill sergeant and a second mother rolled into one. "You want power," she said the first night, her voice sharp as glass. "You need numbers. Learn how to read 'em. Learn how to write 'em. You master your books, and nobody can lie to you again." Her words hit me like gospel. I had been lied to for so long, by family, by circumstance, by the little voice inside me that whispered I wasn't enough. If numbers could shut that voice up, I'd learn to speak them like a second language. Mrs. Patterson didn't coddle. When I got my first quiz back and saw the red ink bleeding across it, I wanted to leave. But she pulled me aside, held the paper up, and said, "Every mistake here, it's a fingerprint. It means you showed up. Now learn from it and move forward." She started handing me extra assignments, little puzzles tucked into envelopes. When I got something right, she didn't say, "Good job." She just handed me the next one. That quiet belief lit something in me. For the first time in my life, someone expected more because they thought I could give it, not because they wanted to watch me fail. Outside of class, life was still grinding. I juggled 2 jobs, fell asleep on buses, and ate in 10-minute windows between shifts. But something had changed. I wasn't surviving anymore, I was sharpening. At the thrift shop, I convinced the owner to let me handle inventory logs. I reorganized his back room, labeled boxes, created spreadsheets from scratch. He didn't understand half of it, but he saw sales improve and handed me an envelope with a small bonus one Saturday. He called it a thank you for not quitting like the last 3 kids. I called it the first brick in my empire. The diner was harder. I still worked doubles, but I started noticing patterns. Which days saw the biggest tips, which servers made customers laugh, which dishes ran out fastest. I kept a tiny notebook in my apron pocket and jotted it all down between orders. It felt like stealing knowledge out from under the nose of the world that tried to forget me. Mrs. Patterson noticed the changes. One night after class, she handed me a book, Small Business Basics. Inside the front cover, she'd written in black pen, "You're not just meant to keep books. You're meant to write one of your own." I read that book cover to cover in 3 days and started dreaming in percentages. I made a new list in my notebook, build something of my own, be the boss I never met, never beg for a chair at someone else's table again. It wasn't fast. Progress never is. There were nights I cried from exhaustion. Days I showed up late and got chewed out. I still ate rice and slept too little. I still walked home with holes in my shoes. But something inside me was growing stronger than the fatigue, something shaped like purpose. A few months later, the thrift store owner asked if I could help him figure out why his supplier orders were always over budget. I stayed after hours, combed through receipts and found duplicate entries, mischarges, and lazy rounding. I made a full report and handed it to him with shaking hands. 2 weeks later, he offered me a part-time position, not as a stock girl, but as his bookkeeper. I said yes without blinking. It was only 10 hours a week, but it was the first time I was paid to use my brain instead of just my hands. That same month, I started helping a few of his small business friends. Cash jobs, quiet work, balancing books for barbershops, corner stores, and food trucks. Word spread slowly but steadily. They didn't care that I didn't have a degree. They cared that I showed up, told the truth, and saved them money. And then came the day I filed my own DBA, Olivia Martin Freelance Bookkeeping and Budgeting. It cost me $60 to register. I paid for it in quarters and folded bills. The woman at the counter asked if I had a business address. I gave her my apartment number. She didn't blink, just typed it in and slid me the papers. I walked out into the sun feeling 10 feet tall. No applause, no parade, just a quiet, fierce pride curling in my chest. My name, printed in ink, meant I was no longer waiting to be rescued. I was becoming my own rescue. With every job I took, I learned more. I built templates, tracked invoices, read tax codes like they were novels. I saved every dollar I could. I stopped buying coffee out and brewed it at home. I made bulk meals and froze them. I turned my room into an office with a folding table and sticky notes on the wall. I created a new list in my notebook: replace carpet with hardwood. Laptop that doesn't freeze. Move out. Start a real emergency fund. Open a second income stream. At night, I scrolled through online forums, watching how people built side hustles into empires. I studied digital marketing, passive income strategies, and low overhead businesses. I wasn't sure what I'd land on, but I knew I would land somewhere, and I would build a home there. My first big client came through a referral, a local event planner who needed someone to sort out 2 years of receipts. She was skeptical when she met me, young, tired-looking, no fancy office, but I told her I'd do a free week just to prove myself. She agreed. 3 days later, she offered me a monthly retainer, said I caught things her last accountant missed. That check, it changed my life. It wasn't thousands, but it was proof. It was validation. It was a window cracking open. I paid off the last of my credit card debt that month, bought a new laptop, paid my rent early for the first time in my life. I stood in my little room, ran my hand across the desk I'd bought secondhand, and realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was winning. It was small. It was quiet. But it was mine. And I wasn't done yet. Because if the shadows had taught me one thing, it was this: you don't need a spotlight to grow, only soil, time, and stubborn light inside you. The roots were deep now, and soon something would bloom that no one in my family could ignore. Not even the ones who told me to never come back. Not even the ones who would come begging. You don't have to scream to make power move. Sometimes the loudest success is the one they never hear coming. By the time I turned 27, the girl who slept on bus station benches had built a business no one in my family knew existed, and I liked it that way. I'd learned early that people root for you until you pass them. After that, your wins feel like insults, so I stayed quiet. No announcements, no posts, no look at me updates, just steady progress while the world assumed I was still drowning. Most people don't notice the woman in the corner with the laptop and the refill coffee. They don't see the invoices organized into color-coded tabs or the spreadsheets with 15 conditional formulas running at once. But I saw them, and more importantly, I understood them. What started with a single DBA and 10 hours a week ballooned into a full client load in under a year. My name floated through word of mouth like a well-kept secret. She's reliable. She saved my books. She actually listens. One of my clients, a marketing consultant, offered to build me a basic website in exchange for a year's worth of bookkeeping. I said yes. He designed something clean, professional, nothing flashy, just enough to show I was real. I paid a designer friend from the community center class to create a logo. She drew a phoenix rising out of an abacus. I laughed, then told her it was perfect. Within 2 years, I had a wait list. I had contracts. I had options. Still, I said nothing to my family. I let the silence grow thick between us, let it cover the sound of my success like snow over a field. Occasionally, a relative would post some throwback picture on Facebook, tagging everyone but me. Emma's graduation, Daniel's wedding, Dad's retirement party. I wasn't mentioned, wasn't missed. Apparently, the official narrative was that I had gone off the grid after failing to find direction. I didn't correct them. Let them tell their story. I was busy writing mine. The diner, I let it go. The cleaning job walked away the day I signed my 5th client retainer. The thrift shop, I still visited sometimes, but only to donate. I once dropped off 4 full suits I never planned to wear again, pressed and dry cleaned. The owner didn't recognize me at first. When he did, his jaw dropped. I smiled, pressed an envelope of cash into his hand, and said, "For the next kid who needs a little extra." It wasn't just the business that grew. So did I. I started working with a financial planner who taught me about investing, taxes, scaling. We created a system that split my income, 60% to expenses, 20% to savings, 10% to investments, 10% to freedom. He told me freedom money wasn't about splurging. It was about reclaiming dignity. So I used it to get my teeth fixed, to replace every worn-out thing I used to pretend was fine, to buy silence from the ache of hunger, debt, and scarcity. Then one morning, something shifted. I was walking past a row of brownstone apartments, admiring the architecture like I always did, when I saw a small handwritten sign in the window of one unit, for sale by owner. Cash buyers only. I didn't think. I called. The place was rough but salvageable. 1 bedroom. Cracked tile, water heater older than me, but the bones were strong. It cost more than anything I'd ever spent, and yet I had the funds. Quietly, without fanfare, I made the purchase outright. No mortgage, no co-signer, just me. A girl who once cried in a laundromat now owned her own walls. I didn't throw a housewarming. No champagne. No Instagram post. Just me and a screwdriver, tightening the loose handle on the front door, smiling like I had a secret the world wasn't ready to hear. I moved in on a Saturday, unpacked my 2 suitcases, and placed my notebook on the desk in the sunniest room. Then I wrote a new list: paint the walls whatever color I want, learn how to change a faucet, start a second business, forgive myself for believing their version of me. A few weeks later, I stood at the window of my new apartment, drinking tea from a real ceramic mug, not plastic, not paper. I looked out at the street, people passing, not knowing that the woman behind the glass had once stood in that same coat, counting nickels for bus fare. I wasn't rich, not yet, but I wasn't afraid anymore, and that was wealth of its own. Still, there was a quiet ache I hadn't shaken, the knowledge that they didn't know, that my mother probably still told her friends I was figuring it out, that my father still believed I lacked drive. It didn't bother me exactly, but it lived in a corner of me. A part of me still wanted them to see what I had built, not to validate me, but to prove they never really saw me at all. But I resisted. I kept my number the same, but changed my address, kept my head down, but eyes up. Then one day, fate threw the match. I received a voicemail from an unknown number. The voice was breathless, panicked. "Hey, Olivia, it's Aunt Janine. Sorry to call out of the blue, but something's happened. Your parents, well, it's not good. Call me back, okay?" I stared at the phone for a long time. My hands didn't tremble, my stomach didn't twist. I just stood there, calm, aware that the moment I had spent years preparing for had finally arrived. The mountain I climbed in silence had brought me to this edge. And below were the very people who told me to disappear. I didn't yet know what they wanted. But I knew one thing for certain: they weren't ready for the woman I'd become. And soon, they'd find out exactly how wrong they'd been. The call from Aunt Janine wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, my phone lit up like a guilt-ridden Christmas tree. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Old neighbors who once watched me walk home with cracked souls and downcast eyes. Even one of Daniel's old college friends, reaching out, just to check in. None of them said it directly. But they all hinted at the same thing. Something had broken in the Martin household. And this time, it wasn't me. The full story came in fragments, half-truths, gossip, second-hand confessions passed like whispers through a church pew. My father's small logistics company had gone under. Something about a bad deal, unpaid invoices, supply chain issues no one could untangle. The bank foreclosed on the warehouse property. Mom's health was failing too. She'd always had that polished veneer, pearl earrings, pressed shirts, the illusion of control. But behind closed doors, there had been years of quietly ignored symptoms. The kind of health problems you can manage until you can't. They'd taken out a second mortgage to pay for her treatments. It wasn't enough. The bills piled up. The insurance barely covered the essentials. My parents, once smug at holiday dinners, now skipped meals to afford medications. And the worst part, Daniel and Emma, the golden children, had vanished. Daniel, now a high-flying lawyer in D.C., sent a single check early on, then claimed his hands were tied. Said he had a family to protect and a mortgage of his own. Emma was no better. She'd married rich, moved states away, and told everyone my parents had set the terms of their own suffering. She texted once, according to Aunt Janine. Just 3 words, figure it out. For the first time in their lives, my parents reached for the children they had raised to believe were stars, only to find those stars had long since burned out. And so slowly, shamefully, their hands turned toward the one daughter they had thrown away. The first message came through email, not a call, not a letter, an email, subject line, "Hey, sweetheart. Body, we miss you. Things have been hard lately. We've been thinking about you so much, hoping you're doing well. Would love to catch up if you're open to it. Maybe come home for dinner sometime. We're still at the house. Love, Mom and Dad." I stared at it for a long time, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. There was no apology. No mention of that night at the table. No acknowledgement of the years they spent pretending I didn't exist. They had written love, but it read like need. And that was new. More messages followed. A voicemail from my mother, her voice fragile, almost unrecognizable. "Olivia, honey, I don't know if you're getting these. Your father's pride, well, he won't say it, but he's worried. I'm worried. We'd really, really love to see you. We made mistakes. But family is family, right?" Then another from my father, short, gruff, edges sanded down by desperation. "Olivia, it's your dad. I know we haven't talked, but if you've got time, we could use your help. Come home, okay?" Home, as if that word still meant something. As if the house where they exiled me still carried warmth instead of rot. I didn't respond, not immediately. Instead, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, hands curled around a mug of tea, heart pacing like it was deciding whether to remember or forget. My mind spun through memory like a record stuck on repeat. That dinner, that sentence. "Don't come back until you're successful." The door closing behind me. The rain, the ache, the silence. And now they were the ones on the outside of a locked door, knocking. I didn't tell anyone I knew, not Mrs. Patterson, not the client who had become a friend, not the girl at the community center who cut my hair for free every other month. This was mine. Mine to feel. Mine to face. Mine to decide. Because here was the truth no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't always come in fury. Sometimes it comes wrapped in quiet power. In control. In choosing not to answer right away. I went to the post office the next day and found a cream-colored envelope in my box. No return address. Handwritten. Neat cursive. My name underlined. I knew it was from my mother before I opened it. Her perfume lingered faintly on the paper, some blend of lilac and grief. The letter was 4 pages. Every word carefully chosen, as if she thought she could spell her way back into my life. She wrote about the bills, the medicine, the foreclosure notice tacked to their front door, the empty chairs at holidays. How quiet the house had become, how she missed the sound of my laugh in the hallway. She wrote, "I didn't realize how much space your absence would leave behind." She wrote, "You were always strong, I see that now." She wrote, "Please just come visit, just for a day." At the bottom, a PS in my father's handwriting. "We're proud of you, you know, we just didn't know how to say it." I folded the letter with steady hands, and for the first time in years, my hands trembled, not from pain, not from fear, not from loss, but from power. The power of being wanted by the same people who once believed I had nothing to offer, the power of knowing I could say yes or no. That this time I was the one with the choice, that they had built a tower of judgment, and now it was crumbling at their feet. I placed the letter on my desk next to the contract I was reviewing. My phone buzzed with another voicemail, and I smiled, because the collision was coming, and I was ready. The day I decided to return, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that holds its breath before a storm. Fitting, I thought. Let the clouds bear witness. I chose the date. I chose the hour. And most importantly, I chose the terms. There would be no announcement, no text saying, "On my way." No heads up to soften the blow. I wanted them to feel it, not as revenge, but as revelation. To look out the window and realize the daughter they buried had grown into someone they could no longer ignore. I drove into my old neighborhood behind the wheel of a midnight blue Jaguar F-Pace, sleek, quiet, and unapologetically expensive. It wasn't just a car, it was proof, not of wealth, but of transformation, of arrival, of everything they said I would never be. Neighbors were out in their yards, raking leaves, walking dogs. One woman, Mrs. Harrington, who used to offer backhanded compliments about my creative choices, froze mid-step as I rolled past. I saw her lips form my name before she even realized she'd said it. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, heads turned, curtains shifted. A child dropped a basketball and stared. I parked slow, deliberate, let the engine purr before I shut it off, and then silence. The front door opened before I even reached the porch. My mother stood there, thin and pale, wrapped in a cardigan I remembered from winters long ago. Her makeup was soft, faded, like someone trying to look younger than their grief. Behind her, my father hovered like a shadow. Still broad-shouldered, but smaller somehow. The kind of smallness that comes from watching everything you built begin to rot. "Olivia," my mother whispered, clutching the doorframe like it might keep her from falling. I stepped onto the porch and let them take me in. My tailored coat, my heels, my watch, my silence. My father cleared his throat. You look well," I nodded once. "I am." They stepped forward in unison, arms out, rehearsed smiles on their faces like none of it had ever happened. Like I hadn't stood outside this same house in the rain with a bag and a broken heart. Like they hadn't slammed a door behind me and locked it with a sentence. I didn't move to meet them. Instead, I let the silence stretch until it snapped. "You said, don't come back until you're successful," I said quietly, hands in my coat pockets. "So I didn't." The color drained from my mother's face. My father tried to smile, but it landed wrong. "We were wrong. Things were said in frustration." "No," I cut him off. "Things were said in finality." "You meant it. You all did." A breeze moved through the yard. The leaves whispered. Somewhere across the street, a dog barked and fell quiet again. They stood frozen, unsure whether to defend themselves or dissolve. "I buried myself to survive," I said. "And in the dirt I built something you just never thought to look." My mother's voice cracked. "Olivia, please, let's not." "You want forgiveness without reckoning," I said. "But I didn't come here to make you feel better." I walked past them and into the house. Same entryway. Same creaky floorboard, but everything felt smaller, older, like a once grand stage with the curtains torn. In the living room, the furniture sagged. The light bulbs flickered. The scent of mothballs and desperation clung to the air. My father limped in behind me. "We've fallen on hard times." "So I've heard." He looked at me then, not like a daughter, but like a stranger holding a lifeline. "I lost the company," he said. "Your mother's sick, we're drowning, and your siblings—" "They're gone," I said flatly. "I know." My mother reached for my hand. "We need you." There it was, the raw reversal. Once I begged them to see me. Now they were begging to be seen by me. I didn't flinch when she touched my hand, but I didn't hold hers back either. "I spent years building a life from nothing," I said. "While you played happy family without me, you told everyone I was a failure." "A ghost. You sat at tables where my name wasn't allowed." Her lips trembled. "We were scared. You were so lost." "No," I said softly. "You were lost. I just wasn't what you wanted, so you threw me out and rewrote the story to make it easier to sleep." I saw it then, the crumbling in her eyes, the way guilt aged her faster than sickness ever could. We sat. They offered tea. I declined. They made small talk. I listened in silence. They asked about my work, my apartment, my life. I gave them half-truths, enough to sting, not enough to soothe. And then, when the awkward pleasantries ran dry, my father leaned forward, fingers steepled like a man about to negotiate. "Olivia," he said, voice gravel, "if there's anything you can do, help us keep the house, cover the medical, just until we get back on our feet." I looked at them both. their eyes full of pleading, their mouths waiting for grace. And I realized something important in that moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply free. I stood up, brushing invisible lint from my coat. My mother rose too, reaching for me again. I stepped back, gentle but firm. "I didn't come back for you," I said, voice calm and measured. "I came back for me." They froze. "To see if the place that once shattered me still had power over me." I smiled, soft but sharp. "It doesn't." I walked toward the door as they stood motionless, the weight of their choices finally pressing down where it belonged. I stepped into the open air, the cool wind filling my lungs like truth. And as I slid behind the wheel of my car, turned the key, and pulled away, I didn't look back. Because I had nothing left to prove, and everything still ahead of me. There's a difference between healing and rescuing. I had done the first for myself. I would never do the second for them. 2 weeks after my visit, I received a thick envelope by courier. Inside were financial statements, copies of overdue notices, and a typed letter with a desperate tone masquerading as professional. It was from my father. He'd itemized their debts, the mortgage balance, hospital bills, insurance gaps, utility shut-off warnings, everything down to the cost of refilling my mother's prescriptions. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote, "You have always been independent. We're proud of that now, but we're in crisis. Anything you can do, loans, donations, advice, would make a difference. We're not asking out of entitlement. We're asking out of family." That word again. Family, so convenient now. I folded the letter once, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside. Then I opened my laptop and finished wiring a deposit for a 5-bedroom property just outside the city, sprawling backyard, a home office that overlooked a private garden, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a sunroom where I planned to read on rainy afternoons. Paid in full, no mortgage, title in my name. It would be the 3rd property I'd acquired since building my business. But still, I said nothing. Not to them, not yet. I wasn't done watching the unraveling. The next message came from Emma. We hadn't spoken in almost 5 years. "Hey, Liv, Mom and Dad said you visited. Heard you're doing well. Just wanted to say I'm happy for you. I miss us. Maybe we could grab lunch sometime. Let me know." I didn't reply. 2 days later, Daniel messaged. "Heard you've got your own business. Impressive. I was wondering if you'd be open to consulting for a colleague of mine's small firm bookkeeping issues. Also, let's catch up." I didn't reply to him either. Suddenly, I was worth knowing again. They thought I'd return with open arms and blank checks. They underestimated what years of silence had taught me. Proximity is not proof of love. I agreed to meet them again, one last time. This time, I invited them to my space. A client-turned-designer had helped me convert my home into a minimalist dream. Warm wood, soft earth tones, subtle luxury. No screaming logos, just quiet power. My mother clutched her purse with both hands as she stepped into the foyer, looking around like she was afraid to touch anything. My father muttered, "This is something." "Built it myself," I said simply. "With every job you looked down on, every hour you thought I was wasting." They sat on the edge of my couch like children in the principal's office. "I've reviewed the documents," I said, setting their envelope on the table between us. "And," my father asked, voice cracking. "I'm sorry," I replied, steady, "but I won't be helping you." My mother gasped. "Olivia, we could lose everything." "You already did," I said, leaning forward. "You lost me, years ago, long before the debt and the pills and the foreclosure notices. You lost me the night you turned your backs and told me I wasn't enough." "You were enough," she whispered, tears forming. "You just weren't convenient." My father tried to argue. "You're in a position now, this house, that car. How can you not help your own blood?" "I am in this position," I said sharply, "because of what you did. Because you forced me to build without scaffolding. I learned to rise without safety nets, and I will never use the tools I forged to rebuild what broke me." The doorbell rang. It was Daniel and Emma. I hadn't invited them. They let themselves in, brash and bright, as if nothing had happened. "Wow," Emma said, scanning the space. Nice place, didn't know you had it in you. Daniel gave me a once-over. So you're really doing all this by yourself? I didn't answer. Emma sat beside our mother and immediately launched into charm mode. Listen, Liv, we're all trying to figure this out. We've made mistakes. But Mom and Dad are in bad shape. And well, you've got resources now, we thought maybe. No, I said, standing. It was the calmest no I'd ever spoken. Daniel frowned. Don't be petty. You're not above family just because you have some cash and a fancy couch. This isn't about money, I said. This is about memory. Mine is intact. Yours is selective. Emma rolled her eyes. Are you really going to throw away your family just to prove a point? I looked each of them in the eye. I'm not throwing anything away. I already lived through being discarded. I know what it costs. Silence, raw, heavy, real. My mother cried openly now. My father stared at the floor. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Emma glared like a child denied candy. I walked to the door and opened it. You should go, I said gently. No screaming, no drama, just a final boundary spoken with grace. They moved slowly. My father offered a handshake. I didn't take it. My mother whispered, I'm sorry, but I didn't answer. Daniel muttered something under his breath. Emma sniffed as if the air itself offended her. They stepped into the fading afternoon light, their silhouettes framed in the doorway, small, tired, humbled. I stood in the silence after the door closed, letting it wash over me. No applause, no witnesses, but inside, it felt like thunder. My revenge hadn't come with cruelty. It came with clarity. I hadn't destroyed them. They'd done that to themselves. All I had done was refuse to save them from it. As I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, I saw their car pull away. Slowly. Quietly, no honking, no shouting. Just the soft noise of people driving back into a life they could no longer manage, without the one they had once called a failure. And I watched in silence, not out of spite. But because silence now belonged to me, it was no longer exile, it was choice. And that choice echoed louder than any cry for help. Peace doesn't arrive with applause, it doesn't knock, it settles. Quiet. Solid. Like a key clicking into the right lock after years of trying the wrong ones. That's what I felt in the months after I walked away from my parents. Not vindication, not revenge, but something deeper. A life that finally belonged to me. My parents never called again, not after that day in my living room. Not after I closed the door without rage, without promises, without pity. I heard through Aunt Janine that the house was sold at auction, that they'd moved into a small rental an hour out of town. My mother's illness had worsened. My father worked part-time at a hardware store, though even that became sporadic. Their days of giving orders were over. They answered to billing departments now. Daniel didn't visit. Emma had a baby and sent no photos. The golden children had washed their hands, of them. Of guilt. Of me, and my parents. They were left with what they'd built, a family based on performance, not presence. A hierarchy, not a home. And without someone to perform for, it all collapsed. Meanwhile, I kept building, not for approval, but for legacy. For myself. My business continued to grow. I hired a small team, trained them the way no one had trained me, paid them fairly, listened to them, built systems that empowered instead of exploited. I started mentoring young women from the community center where I first learned bookkeeping. I saw versions of myself in their tired eyes and stubborn hearts. I taught them how to price their time, how to say no, how to stop apologizing for taking up space. I started a scholarship in Mrs. Patterson's name. She cried when I told her, said no one had ever named anything after her before. You taught me what numbers couldn't, I told her, how to measure my own worth. She just smiled and whispered. Then I did something right. My friends became my family. Real friends. Not the ones who came running only when the spotlight hit. The ones who showed up when the power went out. The ones who knew my story and still stayed. We had dinners on my patio, laughter echoing off brick walls. We celebrated birthdays with mismatched plates and wine from local shops. No status games. No silent comparisons, just warmth, truth, Joy, I used to think I needed blood to belong. Now I knew family is built, not born. Sometimes I'd get messages from old classmates. People who once whispered about me being the dropout or the disappointment. They'd say, "Didn't realize you were doing so well." Or, "Wow, I heard about your company. That's amazing." I'd smile politely, thank them, then move on. Because what they were just discovering, I had lived brick by brick, bruise by bruise. Once I drove past my childhood home, not to revisit pain, but to remind myself how far I'd come. The shutters were peeling. The porch sagged. The garden had overgrown with weeds. It looked like a house that had forgotten what love felt like. And for the first time, I didn't ache. I just felt grateful. Because had they not cast me out, had they not told me I wasn't enough, had they not tried to shrink me to fit their image, I would have never learned to grow into my own. People ask me sometimes what success means. Is it the car, the home office, the plaque on the door? No, not really. Success is sitting with your younger self and telling her she made it, that she was never the problem, that the world just didn't know how to hold her light. I think back to the girl who stood in the rain with a duffel bag and no home. She didn't cry because she was weak. She cried because she hadn't yet met the woman she'd become. The one who walks into boardrooms without shrinking. The one who says no without guilt. The one who doesn't flinch when they ask where she came from. Because now, I come from power, from perseverance, from peace. I didn't return to destroy anyone. I returned to reclaim myself, and now I don't look back with bitterness, only clarity. Because some families only love you when you're easy to love. But I learned to love myself when it was hard. Justice was served. But more importantly, I finally found peace. Have you ever been told you'd never make it, only to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments. Let someone else know that silence can be broken and strength can be built. You're not alone. You're just beginning.